Last week, I was preparing to drive in a real-life race meeting against some really, really good race drivers. It was called the 777 Excel Endurance Race, and it was at the Bend at South Australia. Now, I had a fast Excel, I had a co-driver, I had some new tyres, but there was just one problem. I have no idea how the track goes. I don't know any of the corners. I don't even know which direction it goes in. I decided to jump into the sim to try and learn the track in the lead up to the race meeting and see if the preparation in the sim could actually translate to me doing kind of okay in real life. And well, I'll show you how it went. So the race meeting I was competing in is an endurance race at the Bend in a Hyundai Excel race car. The races themselves, we had 2 one-hour endurance races featuring a driver swap midway through each one. There were 44 cars racing at this event, which meant 88 drivers, and included in the entry list were some professional supercars drivers like Tim Slade and Thomas Randall. Also racing were some really kind of proven national level races in Australia, so there were some really quite good steerers there. The car we were all racing in was a Hyundai Excel. Now, Excel racing is one of the cheapest ways to go circuit racing in Australia, and it's often the first step on the ladder if you want to become a professional race driver and race in supercars. The cars themselves are front wheel drive. They're built before 2000 and they're kind of slow, let's be honest. You may recognize this car as the Hyundai Accent in a lot of other countries. The engines we race are basically stock and they produce around 100 horsepower. They are extremely light though, with the cars coming in under like 900 kilograms. So with this, the cars actually turn extremely well because they've got control suspension, and since they're front wheel drive, you really set them up to turn like crazy. So they're pretty sketchy on the way into the corner, but because they're low power, the racing is often really close. You often have draft battles, and you've got to carry your momentum as much as possible and try and slipstream off your competitors. At tracks like Phillip Island, you'll often have like full-on draft races for the win. So for these endurance races, I was driving alongside my partner Jake. We've been building a Hyundai ourselves since COVID in 2020. We've been slowly getting faster and faster over the last year and tuning out each gremlin in the car, but neither of us have won a race in this car yet. So we're hoping to try and get the first one out of the way with this car so it can get to victory lane. Now, the track we were racing at is called the Bend in South Australia. This track is still fairly new. It was built in 2018, and the track layout we were using was the West layout, which has a cut through kind of on the back straight. This track has a good mix of high speed and low speed corners, and there are 2 good straights that you can draft off your competitors. Now, there is an official mod for this track, an Assetto Corsa. It's released by the Bend, and it was commissioned by themselves. It was built using real-life CAD data, and this mod is really good. It's the one I'm using to prepare. It looked pretty accurate to the real-life track, and it's also worth saying that iRacing has just scanned this track as well, so it'll also be on iRacing soon. There's also a mod for the Hyundai Excel, which is pretty good, that I'm also using. So for starters, in preparation, I had to learn the track, and the track doesn't have a lot of like trees or other things to kind of reference off. So I actually found it quite difficult to learn the direction where you're heading. Some things I picked up quite quickly, like the turn 1-2 complex is pretty straightforward. But turn 3, for example, I found really difficult. It was always way tighter than I was anticipating. It felt like the corner went on forever. And I kind of drove off track a couple of times in the sim. The rest of the track was kind of okay though. I was battling understeer at the final corner, which is almost flat out. And yeah, it probably took me like 10 or so laps to really kind of get my head around the track. I did a lot more practice, but the fastest lap that I got to was a 1:41.591. So with my preparation all done, we drove 7 hours to Adelaide for the race meeting, and I got in for first practice. Heading out to the track, I was actually really nervous about driving this track for the first time, especially being around so many drivers. It's the most Excels we've been around yet. My first impressions compared to the sim were different straight away as well. So they'd removed the sausage curbs from the track, so we were taking way more apex speed than I'd prepared for. This immediately made some corners a lot faster than in the sim. Interestingly though, I found the same things that I was struggling with in the sim, I also was struggling with in real life. Turn 3, I really couldn't get my head around the length of the corner. It was always tighter and longer than I was anticipating. I even drove like clean off the road one lap because I thought the corner was like done, and I just drove off the track. So that was the same thing between sim and real life. But there was a big difference I noticed between the sim and that is in the braking and in the shifting. At the bend, I was having like big brake knockoff as well, like going over a lot of really bumpy curbs. So I was tapping the brake before some braking zones. I also find sim racing doesn't really simulate gearboxes very well. I am running like a paddle shifter on my wheel, but in Assetto Corsa, I try to use the clutch on upshifts and downshifts and right foot brake. In real life, I am heel and toe downshifting through every gear, and it feels way more dynamic than it does in the sim. This is probably the biggest difference I found between the sim and real life. The gearbox in real life just feels way more intuitive. You can feel when you don't get a gear in, like you can actually kind of feel it, whilst that technology is just not there for us in sim racing. Even if you have a H pattern shifter, physically the gear will go in, and the game might not let the gear go in, but you won't get that like physical feedback, which is missing. In the sim, I said I was struggling with understeer into the final corner, but in real life, I was actually dealing with lift-off oversteer. So I was getting a bit of understeer on the way in, but what I would do is I would lift off the throttle and the thing would oversteer. I was really messing with my runs onto the main straight, and it's something that I didn't, the sim didn't prepare me for at all. So with all the practice done, we went out for qualifying, and I qualified in the second group, and on my second flying lap, I was the fastest. So I poled it. I put it on pole position. It was the fastest qualifying lap of the day. So I got outright pole, which was great, and a little surprising considering I got a little held up and the lap didn't feel that good. But yeah, with the surprise of qualifying out of the way, we went racing, and we had some really crazy battles up and down the field. In the first race, we crossed the line first to win, but we did have the win removed because we were 0.3 of a second too fast down pit lane, so we were slightly under the minimum pit stop time. And in the second race, I was in like a really crazy last lap 4-way battle for the lead, and I ended up finishing second. What's wild about this battle, I realized, is that two of these drivers also in the battle, Ethan and Kobe, are also great sim racers. It was like esports cup for the win in that race. In some of the battling, I actually got my mirror knocked in on my right and knocked away on the left-hand side of my car. So I like couldn't see out the right-hand side of my car, which is really crazy to deal with in real life. And that's something that you don't get in the sim because you have a virtual mirror, so you don't have to worry about it. So yeah, that was my experience racing. I guess to answer my preparation and how it worked in real life, I think technically prepping kind of worked pretty well. I turned up for free practice one, and I already knew all my braking markers. I knew where I was going to put the car, and I think, honestly, personally, sim racing is fantastic for learning that stuff. The visual markers, the visual kind of muscle memory, I guess, of just like knowing where you're supposed to be and when to turn in, I think is really important for real world racing. That being said though, sim racing can't really prepare you for how it actually feels on track. There was a lot of stuff like real life always feels different from the sim. Where the car is loose in the sim, it was tight in real life, and maybe where it's understeer, it's oversteer, it reacts completely different to what you expect. So I think sim racing is really good for learning a track and learning like where you should brake, what gear you should be in, when you should probably get to the throttle, things like that. But in terms of actually feeling the car control and the car move underneath you, it's no replacement for real life. So yeah, that was my experience racing. This is a bit of a different video, this one, but I had a lot of fun and it was a pretty successful weekend. So I hope it was interesting. Feel free to like the video, or you can leave a comment below with your thoughts. And you can also subscribe to Overtake for, I promise, more sim racing videos. I will see you next time. Goodbye.